The focus is on less talk, more action. Less protocol, more action. And of course, the overriding mantra of the Africa Investment Forum: transactions, transactions, transactions. On the principle of less is more, I share with you two quotes. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Albert Einstein. Coming together is a beginning. Staying together is progress.
We are, as Gauteng province, the economic engine of our country, the manufacturing hub of sub-Saharan Africa, and Johannesburg is the financial and technological nerve center of our continent. Africa is the biggest investment frontier. So the Africa Investment Forum, as we called it in May, is the Davos of Africa.
Why can't you be number one? And I think that I constantly think about that. Africa must be number one. Africa will not be at the end. We know that Africa has infrastructure challenges. We know that that deficit is quite huge. We've been talking about it for quite some time. $68 billion to $108 billion. However, we know that the resources are there to be able to do that. If we are able to tap into the global pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, but most importantly, tap into our own belief.
The total commitment of the Islamic Development Group is reached about $48 billion since the inception in 1976 until now.
So what you're seeing here today is the beginning of great things. It says to me, we are at the cusp of meaningful and tangible things to unfold. But as technocrats, because I always say, if you look at the people here, with the exception of Premier Makura, we make things happen. We are not politicians. And Premier Makura also
on
decided
his behalf,
to join us.
Premier.
Premier Makura also makes things happen, which means actually identifies with us.
Apart from what we are doing today, the greatest benefit that will come out of the Africa Investment Forum is the rebranding of Africa. Africa has always been seen from the CNN syndrome of disasters. We only see wars, crises, and so on. But today there is money in Africa. We can only gain dynamic comparative advantage if we trade more with ourselves. If we don't create the investments and the infrastructure that will make it possible for us to begin to produce the light manufacturers that China will soon stop producing, we will find ourselves looking for other countries to start exporting the same thing to us.
If you look at the magic number of 25%, fixed capital formation was the number that was identified at the turn of the millennium in Durban. And that 25% number, we're closer to it, but we're not there yet. If you look at what the Asians are doing, the tigers or the newly industrializing countries, they're sitting at 35, 40% investment levels. So the reason we really have to keep pushing this collaboration is to scale up. We're not doing enough.
A number of things are happening already. There are a number of transactions which are closing in many countries. The leaders of those countries are here. I won't mention one particularly, but there are a number of IPPs that are closing, private investment in infrastructure. We need to talk about those good success stories because success actually breeds success. This continent received about $8 billion on average in the last 5 years on average in private investment in infrastructure, $8 billion. If you compare this to Latin America, which is receiving about $45 billion, you see that there's a big gap that I don't know why we cannot close that. In fact, I believe that we can close that gap. So we should try to set ourselves a target to move from the average $8 billion a year that we are getting on private sector investment in infrastructure in Africa to bigger numbers. Maybe not $45 billion the first 2 years, but we can set this as a target.
This is a very important first step. We have agreed that we are going to continue to work together. We have agreed that we would use the Africa Investment Forum as a platform to close transactions. We have several transactions that we have been working on. The Africa Investment Forum has allowed us to fast-track that process. We are looking at transactions in Cairo for a mega petrochemical naphtha cracker that should create the base for additional manufacturing on the continent. We are looking at several other investments in power, in transport, natural resources, and heavy industry that would move the country forward.
The global pension funds that you were talking about and sovereign wealth funds, all those assets under management is $56 trillion. If you add to that the case of the mutual funds, and you add to that the insurance fund, that's about $133 trillion. But leave those ones aside, just focus on the $56 trillion. To close the gap, the infrastructure gap for high five, to light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to integrate Africa, and to improve the quality of life of Africa, we've actually done the estimate that shows that we need to invest $170 billion. Well, I'm sorry, that is 0.32% of the total pension funds and sovereign wealth funds assets under management globally.
This is the commitment we have. This is what we are saying to the outside world and to the private sector. To prepare these projects, we need the skills that lies in the private sector. We want to make sure that we fast-track these projects so that they become very investable.
And finally, is the fact that we want to make sure that we move things, fast-track closure of deals. So when you talk about what the future will look like from here, we agreed over breakfast this morning that all the heads of the president of the financial institutions and others, we're going to meet actually twice a year.
So alone we are weak, together we are strong. Let's go forward over the next 3 days and deliver as one for Africa.
Through this growth, these countries lifted over a billion people out of extreme poverty over this period of time. Over 1 billion people lifted out of extreme poverty, but that was primarily in China, India, and Indonesia. In addition to that, they've had huge increases in human development indicators. So you look at mortality rate, you look at life expectancy has increased by over 10 points in many of these economies. So there's fundamental implications to people's lives by driving this growth, right? The fundamental implications. But at the investment level, which is at the core of it, they did two things. At the macro level, capital accumulation increased significantly in these countries, and they invested more, right? The ones that outperformed, on average, invested 30% of the GDP on a year on year to drive this, and they focus on a combination of foreign investors, right, and the multinationals, but also on domestic investments, right? So they really had a good mix of both, and that's at the macro level.
We see ourselves as an African group. We look at the continent rather than a country. We stand on 3 legs: infrastructure, industry, finance. Those are really our 3 legs.
I'm on my way back here from the Global CEO Conference in Thailand, which is hosted by Forbes every year. And when they start out the conference, they have this tradition of always saying how much money is in the room. And the reason why it's done is so that they know you're not there to waste your time. And last time we were a week ago in Thailand, they said there's $300 billion in the room. And I think it was a great setting in the first session with Dr. Adesina and the Premier and other panelists, where we could see the value of what is sitting here in terms of the financial institutions and the support that is there for Africa. The key issue when you go in as an investor is how you're welcomed. And the same goes for how you're welcomed at home when you go to somebody's house. And if the landing, as Dr. Adesina said, is soft, it's facilitated, you're given the help, you'll go back there. If the visa processes work, and this is going back to basics for investors. I think these are critical areas. But the areas where I find that, and I'm not going to go into talking about what is good somewhere and what is not, because comparatives are based on circumstances in different parts of the world. So where you have certain advantages, you may not have those in other parts. But areas where I think that we have got to pay a bit of attention here in Africa, and the first of which is basically in changing perceptions. And I think changing perceptions is not the purview or responsibility of a single institution, a single government. It's, I think, a collective responsibility, because nobody's going to invest into an environment if they hear all the time that things are wrong. I think there needs to be some revolutionization of our basic financial institutions, not just the DFIs. I think the banking system needs to be looked at to provide better capital, because if you don't provide the capital, there's no way we can look at long-term businesses. And 24% interest, you've got to be in the drugs business to get some kind of a return. So I think there's a lot to be done on the continent. There are a lot of impediments, but we are here because we believe in the continent. We believe that there's a long-term future here. If you look at all the frontiers today, and we are invested in all emerging markets, I find that being here in Africa is one of the greatest decisions that I made 14 years ago. I think we are happier to talk about negative things than positive things. We wake up in the morning and we are happier to read sad news. You want to read sensational things, you want to see what's going wrong. You don't want to see what's happening on the economic side, what development is taking place, where the investments are happening, what policy matters. So I think the first change is in our own minds, in how we deal with things. First, try and change yourself in what you want to see and what you want to become yourself, because what you consume is a reflection of who you are. And I think this is the first thing, because nobody can change that unless you make an attempt yourself.
Many of the African economies that allow themselves to be rated by ratings agencies are rated as junk status, and this plays a role in pricing the risk premium of investing in the continent. So I'd like to find out from Ronnie and Rakesh what role ratings agencies have in perhaps changing the perception, which Ronnie says is mispriced in terms of the risk premium of investing on the continent.
Make sure that your financial markets, your capital markets, your major agencies and your regulatory bodies, your civil services work well. And if all of this works, you don't have to worry about rating agencies.
If you look into Dangote and all others that have made it, you find out that they had very difficult startups. And I feel if we don't address that, so many ideas, so many businesses that would come up will go down the drain.
Finance needs sustainability. We can't run away from that. Small, medium enterprises are better positioned for sustainability if they're supplying to large projects.
I think one of the areas we make the biggest mistake is when we start looking at businesses in short-term spells of quarters or looking at annual returns. You need to start moving your mindset into long-term investments. There used to be a discussion around legacy investments and investments that go for 50 years and 30 years. When I went to Prague, Charles University is 700 years old, and Charles IV is not remembered for anything other than that university. And so we need to start looking at investments as cathedral investments, investments that are going to stand and withstand everything that it comes under pressure around. Look long term, and that's the only way you'll be successful in Africa.
It's been really busy this morning as Gauteng kicked off the very first Africa Investment Forum. I mean, it's a whole host of partners that are involved in this very important forum that will be taking place here at the Sandton Convention Center for the next 3 days. The conversation is about how to accelerate investments into the continent.
Oftentimes, when we talk about reforms, you start with governments and ask them to list the reforms they've done or they're about to do, and the conversation ends there. We're going to do something different by starting with the private sector.
Everybody understands the need. Everybody knows what the cost of lack of power really is. So what is the problem? What we see is it's not institutional capacity, it's institutional inertia. The lack of the government sector, the public sector, to move forward.
What the private sector expects from the government. First of all, we expect stability. We don't want to have surprises I mean, even during the environment, in the absence of the reforms, we are ready to work, but we do not want to meet with the surprises. And secondly, we are looking for transparency. Like in one country, we did that. In a very transparent manner, we negotiated PPA where the government was advised with the top-notch advisors, and we did not negotiate with ourselves, but we negotiated with people, they know the sector and requirements of the sector. We went very fast.
Africa is really very attractive for everybody, especially that for us to invest in IPPs, let's say in the Gulf region, the return on the investments for the IPPs in the Gulf region and other places is really much less than investment in Africa.
Privatization across many governments who have chosen to go that way now is a major reform, but it won't come without problems. So it's like a rose with thorns. Let us look at the 14 solar power projects that have been on the table. Perhaps this audience deserves to know that those projects have been on the table for months, if not years, before I came into office. They couldn't even initiate a PPA. We got that done.
What brings South Sudan to the first ever Africa Investment Forum?
Our purpose for coming here is to come and tell the members of the continent, of which South Sudan is a member too, that South Sudan currently has already achieved peace. We have celebrated the achievement of peace on the 31st of October last month.
Deputy Minister, the new peace deal, can investors be assured that it will be sustainable?
As I'm talking to you, members of the fighting groups are now in Juba. So I'm assuring our people from the continent that peace is a reality in South Sudan. Conditions for investment are also conducive.
So an investor is asking, what's in it for me? What kind of returns can they expect, and what kind of incentives are you offering for them to bring their money to your country?
The first assurance that I have to give as a representative of the government is that security is number one. Whoever comes to invest in South Sudan, the protection is the responsibility of the government in the Republic of South Sudan. Two, we will provide land. You don't expect somebody to come and invest without giving land to. The land will be provided, and there is already a law that has provided a free to whoever comes to invest in South Sudan.
This has been a very important step for Africa. For the very first time in our continent, bringing the different multilateral finance institutions, various investors, and getting the Europeans, the Asians, and the Americans, to particularly those major development finance institutions, to join us on our terms in Africa, to talk about investment and not aid, is a tremendous step. It's a game-changing thing for our continent.
This issue of jobs, it's something that this entire country is screening out for. Would you prioritize when it comes time to sign deals with perhaps projects that create more jobs?
Yes.
Rather than more money and less jobs?
Yes, certainly we infrastructure projects, we have done a full study that I've spoken about a few times during the State of the Province address. We know that for every rand you invest in an infrastructure project, what goes, how many jobs are created, how much goes to boost people's incomes, household incomes, how much goes to boost government revenue. So we definitely looking at all the spin-offs of infrastructure investment. The best way to actually drive sustainable, inclusive growth is to invest in infrastructures.
What do you think you can do more to make it easier for people to come and invest and set up business here?
I think one of the great things we have here is the Gauteng Investment Center, which is one of the three, South Africa's three one-stop shops. Our investment center, which is run by our economic development department, has been doing very, very well. Registration of companies To register a company now takes us the shortest space of time. We're able to facilitate with the municipalities in the province to identify areas of investment, what types of projects, to also look at incentives. We have our own local incentives. We work with the Home Affairs Department to deal with visa regulations to ensure that it is easy for people to come.
In terms of Ethiopia, Ethiopia can provide a very good comparative advantage for East Africa since we have significant hydropower potential. This hydropower, if it is harnessed and distributed in East Africa, can enable other East African countries to generate their renewable energy, and this hydropower can play very important function of stabilizing the energy, pool.
You put a target, and so if there is something that you expect on 10th of November, and just this.
We don't want hot investments. We want stable, long-term, bankable, profitable investments in Africa. That's the first thing. The second thing that we are trying to do is we're trying to change the perception of Africa. You see, all of us that are here are all African finance institutions. We are here to say that we are putting our resources collectively together with confidence in Africa's future. And we are going to deploy our resources collectively for getting that done. It's a total change of the way we do business.
We are saying to the investors out there that we are ready to lead this charge to prepare projects together, because some of the projects might become impossible when you're facing them all by yourself.
Now, we are a partner of the African Development Bank, and we have worked with the bank to look at the projects, the kind of bankable projects, the number of bankable projects that were coming to the conference. So we've been working over a long period of time in the run-up to this conference, also to know which projects the bank is prepared to underwrite.
One of the reasons why investors did not invest so much in the country before was policy uncertainty. And currently we have a situation where in Gauteng, government says that e-tolls must go. But nationally, the ruling party says that's not the policy of government. So how does government in Gauteng try to attract investors, whereas there's this policy uncertainty happening currently in this country?
So there is no confusion. Someone is talking about policy uncertainty now. In our country, if you said this last year, I would say, yeah, you are right. But there's a different mood amongst investors in South Africa. South Africa supports the user pay principle. User pay principle for infrastructure projects, but the issue of urban tolling is a very specific, contentious issue. We have projects that businesses are willing, or the only question they want to know is how are you going to fund it? When you sort out the funding model, there's no confusion on policy uncertainty, but you don't want a funding model that's contentious.
This coalition, what I call the Coalition for Africa's Development, it's intended to change it. I don't think that if we all pull together to do things, that there is no business person, no investor that is serious that will not come along.
And we know that with our balance sheets, we can mobilize much more capital to support projects on the continent.
I think the good news is we have been delivering very good results now for quite some time. Not everybody in this room may know that foreign direct investment outstripped official development assistance just a few years ago. It's still very young, but clearly investment is happening in a way that we've never seen before.
We're talking about investing in women for accelerated growth. President Adesina, I'm going to start with you. The motto for the African Development Bank, building today, a better Africa tomorrow. The role of women in your vision, sir.
When I look at the issue of women, and Africa went through structural adjustment programs, and many people lost jobs and so on. It's actually the women that kept the economies of Africa actually going. Most of the businesses you find in Africa today, 80–90% of them are small and medium-sized enterprises. They're actually owned by women. But that's where the challenge really is, that the women don't have access to finance. I think we've got to change the way financial markets work. We've got to trust women businesses better. We have to support them with technical assistance, but we have to let them grow. Because when Africa gets the issue of women right, it will finally have gotten its development right.
If you want to change the world, help women. And that brings me to Secretary Al Gabra. If you can give us a sense of what Canada is doing in terms of policy and where women are being put at the center of policy.
And one of the things we did, we passed a new law that requires corporations to be transparent about their board of directors and to put a plan how they can diversify members of their board of directors, including women.
As an entrepreneur, share your experience.
You need to make the woman a critical component of our financial system, such that you will be sure that she will engage her children, she will educate them, she will empower them, she will support the building of the community. She's far more stable, dedicated, loyal to systems than, no offense meant to the men. I'm a mother of boys. I have 3 boys and a husband. So this is not anything against the men. It's just the facts of where we are. And the reality is we must find ways to empower every young girl and every young woman, first with knowledge, because passion for entrepreneurship is in knowledge. First, we keep them with the right knowledge. 2, we make sure that they have the resource to actualize their dreams and ultimately add to the value of moving our African countries to where we really need them to get to.